In this video, we're going to build a simple multi-threaded Python web server that accepts multiple clients using threading, handles GET requests, serves static HTML files from a folder, and finally returns a 404 for any missing pages that might be in the server, that is. Now, there are a few things that, of course, we need to understand before we build our web server. And one of those things that we need to understand is, what is a web server? To understand what a web server is, simply, a web server is a program that listens for HTTP requests from clients. These clients could be browsers. It processes those requests, and then it sends back an appropriate HTTP response. This could be in the form of HTML pages, JSON data, images, etc. What we're going to build, we're going to just start with a simple web server in Python. And this web server is going to use a socket module to listen for connections. It's going to pass incoming HTTP requests. It's going to respond to a static HTML page, and we're going to write it in a clean and maintainable way. Now, to set up our server, there are a few things that we need to do to set up our server. We're going to start by opening up a socket that is going to help us communicate over the network. Now, what is a socket? Which is the next thing that we need to understand here. So to understand what a socket is simply an endpoint for communication between two machines over a network. Think of it like a telephone line that allows computers to send and receive data. And there are a number of steps that we use to create a socket, and they're just four main steps. The first thing that we do is we create a TCP socket. We bind the socket to a specific port that we're going to define. Then we can start listening for incoming connections and finally accept connections to handle requests. So four steps that we use to create our web server. We create a TCP socket, we specify a port, and we bind that port as well. We start listening to incoming connections, and we accept connections and handle the requests that come in. So just the way you can start by setting up a simple web server is, allow me to just get rid of all that. We start by importing socket, and we're going to use this in a moment as well. Then we start with the first step of creating a simple Python web server. We start by creating a TCP socket. To get a TCP socket, we're going to create just a simple variable called server socket, and we're going to tag socket, and we'll just say socket. Then the socket here should be, I'll remove this R. So we'll say socket.socket, and it's going to take in two things. So it's going to take in a socket that uses IPv4, and it's also going to take in a socket that uses TCP. So how that is going to be, it's going to be socket dot, the first one is called AF underscore inet. Then the second is going to be socket.sockstream. The socket should be in lowercase. Socket dot sock underscore stream, like that. So with this here, this should be socket in lowercase. What this line does, this line simply creates a TCP socket. Then you can go to the second step, which is binding the socket to an IP address or to a specific port. To do that, we can just first of all, you can start by creating a server and specifying a port to that. So we'll just store it in a variable and we call it server address. And this is going to give it localhost. Of course, we're going to be using localhost. And then we can also go ahead and specify a port. So we make our port 8080. Then you can go ahead and bind the socket to the IP address and port. So we'll just say server socket dot bind. Then we'll just pass in the server address, like that. So feel free again to combine all this into a single line, but still works. Then we move to the third step, which is where we start listening for connections. And for us listening to connections, we're going to specify to have maybe like a maximum of 5 clients in a queue. To do that, we'll just say again server address. It should be server socket, not address. So server socket dot listen. and we just give it 5. So what that means is that there's going to be a maximum of 5 clients in a queue. Then you can just print a simple statement here, and you can say server listening to port 8080. Server listening to port 8080. Should be an N here. Yeah, like that. So server listening to port 8080. And with that, basically we've done the first 3 steps. We've created a TCP socket. We've bind the socket to an IP address and a port. Then we've listened to the connections. Now the fourth step, which is also a major step now, which is the last one as well, is to accept these connections and handle these connections. To do that, we just use a simple while loop. So we'll just say while true. There should be while true. So while true, we're going to do a few things here. We'll start by just printing a statement that is going to tell us where the connection is coming from. So to get where the connection is coming from, we need the client address. We need the client address. Then we also just need a client socket as well. So define 2 variables here. So client socket and client address, client underscore address. And to get this two, all we need to do is just say server socket dot accept. So once we do that, we're able to get the client socket and the client address. Then we can print a statement, and with this statement, we're simply going to tell that the connection is coming from this specific client address that has been established. So we'll just say I'm going to use an F string here, and then we'll say connection from. So we'll specify the client address and we say the connection has been established. After doing those, we can go ahead and now we can receive and print the request from the client. Then we can send HTTP responses. We can close the client connection at the end as well. So I'd like us to just do these 2 steps, just so that we have it a bit more complete. So we'll start by receiving and printing the request from the client. To do that, all we need to say is we'll take client. So it's a client underscore socket dot, then you can get say resv, then we specify here 1024, then dot decode, and here we'll use UTF-8, UTF hyphen 8. Then we'll store this in a variable. Let's call that variable just request. Then we can now say the request has been received. We specify what that request is. You say request has been, I'll just say request received. Then we just pass in the request right there. Then just to move it to a new line, we'll do that. Then the other thing that we can do here is we can send an HTTP response as well. To send an HTTP response, you can just specify, again, there's a specific way that we structure an HTTP response. Just say response. So how we usually structure an HTTP response is it has to start with the HTTP, of course, then / 1.1, then we'll say 200, 200. Okay, I want to have this in uppercase. Then on a new line, just say \n. I'll just say there should be lowercase n, \n. Then we say hello. Just say hello world. So that is this is going to be our response. There should be an S there. This is going to be our response. Then now to send our response, what we need to type is just client socket dot send all. Then we'll give it the response. Just say response. Then we're going to encode this response with UTF-8, UTF-8. This is going to send an HTTP response. Then you can just simply now close the socket. So to close the socket or the client connection, just say client should be client underscore socket dot close, like that. Now, what you've done here is we have simply created a simple Python, a simple Python web server, and we can go ahead and save this and run. Let's run this and see what we get. So we'll say python3 server.py. As you can see here, it's listening to port 8080. We'll just open a simple browser here. Once we run that, I'm going to just run it again. So the moment we run it, you see the statement hello world that we printed is right here. So here, the response, you can see hello world. And then this is what we get on the terminal as well. So this is the entire connection that you can see. You can see it's received a connection from localhost, or the connection was established as well. The request was received. As you can see here, this is the structure of that response as well, and everything else there. So what you've done is we've basically created a simple Python server. Uh, to understand these HTTP requests, they just look like what you've seen here and what we have also written at this point here. These what our HTTP requests look like. So you'll have of course, how it does is when you visit a specific port. So let's say it's localhost port 88 on your browser, the browser sends an HTTP request that looks something like this now. So what you can see here, you can see we have get, then there's the host, there's the connection, there's all that as well. So and then there's accept also, which is here, and it has some text there as well. That is what our HTTP request looks like. To extract the request path, there's a way that you can go ahead and modify our server to pass the request. But I'd like us to do this in the next video, where we're going to handle multiple clients. Then we can go ahead and also use threads in that case. So I'll see you in the next one.